The scent of old leather and fading roses clung to every surface of Grandmother Eleanor's Victorian mansion, a haunting reminder of the woman who had shaped our lives with her iron will and gentle hands. I stood in the study, my fingers trailing across the spines of leather-bound first editions, each touch unleashing memories like dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. My brother Mark's footsteps echoed through the empty halls, his presence a discordant note in this symphony of remembrance. "Susan," he called out, his voice carrying that familiar edge of urgency that always preceded trouble. "We need to talk about the estate." I turned to face him, noting how the shadows under his eyes had deepened since the funeral 3 weeks ago. Mark had always been the volatile one, the grandson who inherited grandmother's passion but none of her restraint. Now, at 45, his once handsome features were carved with lines of worry, his designer suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. "What's left to discuss?" I asked, trying to keep the weariness from my voice. The will was clear enough. He ran his hands through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it made my heart ache. "The antiques, Susan. We need to make decisions about the collection." The collection. Grandmother's pride and joy, each piece carefully curated over decades of travel and acquisition. My eyes drifted to the empty space where her prized Tiffany lamp had stood, its absence as glaring as a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. "Strange," I murmured, more to myself than to Mark. "I could have sworn the lamp was here yesterday." Mark's slight flinch would have gone unnoticed by anyone who hadn't spent a lifetime reading his tells. "Things get moved during inventory," he said quickly. Too quickly. I moved to the cabinet where grandmother's Georgian silver service had resided for as long as I could remember. The velvet-lined drawer slid open with a whisper, revealing nothing but empty space and the lingering impression of what had been. "Inventory," I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "Is that what we're calling it now?" The tension in the room thickened like smoke. Mark's fingers drummed against his thigh, another tell from our childhood days of missed curfews and borrowed cars. "You always did this," he snapped. "Always had to play the detective, the perfect granddaughter." "And you always had to play the victim," I shot back, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Even now, standing in her house, surrounded by the ghosts of things that shouldn't be missing. A door slammed somewhere in the house, making us both jump. The sound echoed through the empty rooms like a gunshot, and in its wake, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On grandmother's antique desk, partially hidden beneath a stack of papers, lay a receipt from Golden Age Antiquities. Yesterday's date. Mark's signature. He saw where my gaze had landed and moved quickly to snatch the paper, but I was faster. The receipt listed the Tiffany lamp, the silver service, and 3 other pieces. The amount at the bottom made my vision blur. "It's not what you think," Mark began, but I was already pushing past him, my mind racing through calculations. The missing pieces represented nearly a quarter of the collection's value. "When were you going to tell me?" I demanded, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. Or was I supposed to watch piece by piece disappear until there was nothing left of her legacy? Mark's face hardened, a mask slipping into place that I recognized from board meetings and media appearances. "Sometimes legacy isn't about keeping things in glass cases, Susan. Sometimes it's about doing what needs to be done." As I stared at my brother, I saw something shift in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, yes, but beneath it, something else. Something that suggested this betrayal was just the surface of a much deeper current. "What exactly needs to be done, Mark?" I asked softly, dangerously. "And what else haven't you told me?" He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, my phone buzzed. A news alert. My hands shook as I read the headline, "Golden Age Antiquities Under Investigation for Trafficking in Stolen Heritage Items." The silence that followed was deafening. The investigation report burned in my hand like a brand, each word searing itself into my consciousness. Mark's confession came in fragments, each admission drawing blood like shards of broken trust. The debts were crushing me, he said, pacing the study like a caged animal. You don't understand what it's like, Susan, watching everything you've built start crumbling around you. The market crashed, investments went sideways, and suddenly dash. Suddenly grandmother's collection became your personal emergency fund. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Outside, storm clouds gathered, casting the room in premature darkness that matched my mood. It wasn't like that. Mark stopped at grandmother's desk, his fingers tracing the worn leather inlay where she'd spent countless hours writing her memoirs. I had a plan. The sale was just temporary, a bridge to get us through until the project launches. Us? The laugh that escaped me held no humor. There is no us, Mark. You made that clear when you started selling off pieces without even consulting me. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I glimpsed something beneath the desperation, a flicker of the boy who'd once taken a beating from neighborhood bullies to protect my new bicycle. The project, it's about her, Susan. About making things right. Thunder rolled outside as I processed his words. Making what right? Mark reached into the desk drawer, pulling out a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. Remember the scandal in '82? The one that nearly ruined her reputation in the art world? Of course I remembered. The accusations of forgery had nearly destroyed grandmother, though she'd eventually been cleared. The investigation had taken years, and even after her vindication, whispers had followed her through gallery openings and auction houses. What about it? I asked, even as dread pooled in my stomach. She wasn't innocent. Mark's words fell like stones into still water. But she wasn't guilty either. Not the way they thought. He held out the journal. Read it. Please. My hands trembled as I took the book. The leather was soft with age, the pages filled with grandmother's elegant script. As I read, the world tilted on its axis. The truth was there in black and ink, a conspiracy spanning decades, involving some of the most prominent names in the art world. Grandmother had discovered it by accident, then spent years gathering evidence, playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse with people who wouldn't hesitate to destroy her to protect their secrets. She was building a case, Mark explained, his voice soft with something like reverence. But she died before she could expose them. The project I'm working on, it's a continuation of her work. The gallery opening next month will finally bring everything to light. I looked up from the journal, my mind racing. The people she was investigating, they're still out there. Mark's expression darkened. Some of them. And they know we're coming. That's why I had to move fast with the sales. We needed capital, and I couldn't risk going through official channels. You sold her pieces through a gallery under investigation for trafficking. The absurdity of it made me want to scream. Do you have any idea what you've done? If they trace those sales back to us dash. They already have. Mark pulled out his phone, showing me an email. The threat was subtle but clear, back off, or face consequences. That's why I need your help, Susan. Not just as my sister, but as someone who loved her as much as I did. I sank into grandmother's chair, feeling the weight of decades of secrets pressing down on me. The collection I'd been so desperate to preserve suddenly seemed trivial compared to the legacy of truth she'd really left us. Tell me everything, I said finally. From the beginning. As Mark began to speak, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, and in that brief, brilliant moment, I caught a glimpse of movement in the garden below. A figure standing in the rain, watching our windows with patient malevolence. By the time I blinked, they were gone. But the sensation of being watched remained, a cold finger of fear tracing its way down my spine. What had we stumbled into? And more importantly, how deep did grandmother's secrets really go? The truth has a peculiar weight to it, a gravity that bends the light of memory until everything that came before appears distorted, foreign. As I delved deeper into grandmother's journal that night, each revelation carved new channels through my understanding, reshaping the landscape of our shared history like water through stone. The study had become my sanctuary and my prison. Papers surrounded me in concentric circles, bank statements, correspondence, newspaper clippings spanning decades. Each document added another layer to the tapestry of deception grandmother had uncovered, a web of fraud and manipulation that reached into the highest echelons of the art world. The Vermeer auction in '79, I murmured, connecting threads that had been invisible until now. That's where it started, wasn't it? Mark looked up from his laptop, exhaustion etched into the hollows beneath his eyes. She noticed inconsistencies in the provenance documentation. Small things at first, dates that didn't quite align, signatures that seemed too perfect. But when she started pulling at those threads, the whole tapestry began to unravel. I held up a letter dated just months before her death. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but the steel beneath the words was pure Eleanor Wright. She had named names, documented meetings, traced money through offshore accounts with the precision of a surgeon. Why didn't she come to us? The question emerged unbidden, carrying with it a lifetime of carefully contained hurt. We could have helped her. Mark's laugh held no mirth. The same reason she never told anyone about father's gambling debts or mother's affairs. Protecting the family was her religion, Susan. Even when it meant sacrificing her own reputation. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The forgery accusations, she let them think she was guilty to protect someone else. Thomas Blackwood. Mark spat the name like poison. Her protégé. He was young, brilliant, and in debt to the wrong people. They used him to authenticate fake masterpieces, threatened to kill him if he refused. When grandmother discovered the truth, she took the fall. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. But why not expose them then? Why spend decades gathering evidence in secret? Because it wasn't just about art anymore. Mark turned his laptop toward me, showing a series of news articles. Suspicious deaths, disappearances, accidents that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. The people behind this, they've built an empire on fraud and fear. Anyone who threatened to expose them. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I thought of the figure I'd seen in the garden, wondering if even now we were being watched, our every move catalogued and reported. What changed? I asked finally. Why move forward with the exposure now? Mark's expression shifted, something dark and unreadable passing behind his eyes. Because she left us a key. Something they've been searching for since her death. He reached into his briefcase, withdrawing a small leather case I recognized from grandmother's personal safe. Inside lay a simple USB drive, unremarkable except for the delicate engraving along one side, a series of numbers that matched the catalog entries for certain pieces in her collection. Pieces that Mark had sold. Understanding dawned like ice water in my veins. The antiques, they weren't just valuable on their own, were they? They were part of a code. Each piece contains a fragment of information, banking records, correspondence, proof of authenticity tests that were buried or altered. Apart, they're just beautiful objects. Together they're a weapon, I finished, remembering the careful way grandmother had always handled her collection, how she'd insisted on photographing and documenting every detail. But you've sold some of them already. If they fall into the wrong hands. That's just it, Mark said, a hint of his old confidence returning. I didn't sell them. Not really. He pulled up another document on his laptop, transfer records showing the pieces had been moved to a secure storage facility under a different name. I needed them to think they were winning, to let their guard down. The gallery opening isn't just about exposing the truth, it's a trap. The elegance of it took my breath away. Every piece Mark had sold was scheduled to be part of the exhibition, loaned back by their new owners for a retrospective of Eleanor Wright's collection. The very people who had destroyed her reputation would be there, thinking they had successfully scattered her evidence to the winds. But as I studied my brother's face in the growing darkness, I saw something that made my certainty waver. A flicker of fear, quickly masked but unmistakable. Mark hadn't told me everything yet. And whatever he was holding back might be the detail that got us both killed. In the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like artillery fire, and somewhere in the house, a door closed with deliberate softness. We were not alone. Fear has a taste, metallic and sharp, like blood on the tongue. It filled my mouth as footsteps echoed through the darkened house, each measured tread a countdown to confrontation. Mark's face drained of color, and in that moment of naked terror, I saw the truth he'd been hiding behind layers of calculated revelation. They were never going to let us make it to the gallery opening, were they? The words emerged as barely a whisper, yet they seemed to ripple through the room like stones disturbing still water. This whole elaborate plan, it's already compromised. Mark's silence was answer enough. The footsteps drew closer, unhurried, confident. They knew they had us cornered. The USB drive, I hissed, my mind racing through possibilities like a chess player seeing 10 moves ahead, each potential path leading to checkmate. Give it to me. Now. He hesitated, and in that fractional pause, I saw decades of rivalry, of competition for grandmother's approval, of subtle power plays and carefully maintained facades crumble away. What remained was raw and terrifying, the naked truth of siblings facing extinction. The drive pressed into my palm as voices murmured in the hallway. I moved with deliberate grace, every motion calculated, towards grandmother's prized Steinway piano. My fingers found the hidden compartment she'd shown me years ago, her secret place for secret things, she'd called it with a conspiratorial wink. I'd thought it childish then, a game played between grandmother and granddaughter. Now I understood it had been preparation. Mrs. Wright's collection has always attracted, interested parties. The voice that filled the doorway was cultured, precise, wrapped in expensive Italian wool and old money confidence. Thomas Blackwood hadn't aged well, his once handsome face had hardened into something predatory, success and secrets carving deep lines around his mouth and eyes. Two men flanked him, their bulges under their jackets leaving little doubt about their purpose. Thomas. Mark's voice cracked slightly. The arrangements have changed, Blackwood finished smoothly. As arrangements often do when people become unreliable. His gaze swept the room, cataloging details with professional appreciation. Eleanor taught me that. Among other things. Rage bloomed in my chest, a fever that burned away fear. This man had used my grandmother, had forced her to sacrifice her reputation to protect him, had spent decades building an empire on fraud while she quietly, meticulously, built the case to destroy him. She taught me things too, I said, moving to stand beside my brother. Like how to recognize a counterfeit. How to spot the subtle tells that separate true value from mere appearance. My eyes locked with Blackwood's. How to know when someone is bluffing. Something flickered in his expression, uncertainty, quickly masked. The drive, Ms. Wright. It's the only thing we're interested in. Surrender it, and this evening becomes nothing more than an unfortunate memory. Like the unfortunate memory of Gerard Fontaine. The name fell like a bomb into the room. Blackwood's mask slipped further. Grandmother's journal mentioned him, the expert who was going to expose your forgery ring in '85. Before his tragic boating accident. Careful, Ms. Wright, Blackwood's voice carried an edge now. You're venturing into dangerous waters. That's where the truth often lives, isn't it? In dangerous waters. I felt Mark's tension beside me, saw the minute shifts in stance as Blackwood's men prepared for violence. But here's what you don't understand, Thomas. The drive isn't what matters. It never was. Confusion crossed his features, followed by the first real stirrings of fear. Because he saw it in my eyes, the same steel that had lived in Eleanor Wright's gaze. The same unflinching determination to see justice done, whatever the cost. The evidence was never in one place, I continued, feeling the weight of grandmother's legacy settling around my shoulders like armor. It was everywhere. Every piece you thought you were containing, every loose end you thought you were tying up, they were all part of a larger pattern. One that's already in motion. The sound of sirens pierced the night, distant but drawing closer. Blackwood's composed facade cracked entirely. But as his men reached for their weapons, as Mark tensed beside me, as the moment balanced on a knife's edge between violence and salvation, I realized with crystal clarity that grandmother had prepared me for this moment in ways I was only beginning to understand. And somewhere in the house, a clock began to strike midnight, each chime marking the death of secrets long kept in darkness. Time crystallized in that moment, each second stretching like pulled glass, delicate and dangerous. The approaching sirens wailed their banshee song through the rain-soaked night, but in my mind, I heard only grandmother's voice, steady and sure, "Power isn't about force, Susan. It's about knowing exactly when to strike." Blackwood's men had their hands on their weapons, but uncertainty had crept into their stance. Professional killers, yes, but they hadn't expected this calm in the eye of their storm, this absolute certainty radiating from a woman they dismissed as collateral damage. "You're bluffing," Blackwood said, but doubt had infected his voice like rust eating at steel. "The evidence died with Eleanor." Did it? I felt a strange serenity descend, born not of peace but of absolute clarity. "Tell me, Thomas, did you ever wonder why she kept forgiving you? Year after year, betrayal after betrayal, she kept you close. Protected you. Even when you turned on her." The truth dawned in his eyes like a spreading stain. She was watching. All those years. Every meeting you thought was secret. Every transaction you thought was hidden. Every name you dropped in casual conversation. My lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Grandmother taught me patience, Thomas. She taught me how to wait, how to watch, how to recognize the perfect moment when all the pieces align." Mark shifted beside me, and I felt his understanding dawn like a physical force. All those childhood games of chess with grandmother, all those lessons about sacrifice and strategy, they hadn't just been games. They had been preparation. "The gallery opening," he breathed. "It's not just about the evidence. It's about the guests. Every major player in your network," I confirmed, watching Blackwood's face drain of color. "All gathered in one place, thinking they're celebrating their victory. The FBI's Art Crimes Division is very interested in the guest list." The sirens were closer now, their wail a crescendo building to revelation. But Blackwood was a cornered predator, and desperation made him dangerous. His hand emerged from his pocket holding not a gun, but a phone. "One call," he said, voice trembling with barely contained rage. "One call, and certain arrangements I've made ensure that some very unfortunate accidents befall people you care about. Your brother's children, for instance. Your aunt in Phoenix. The choice is yours." The threat should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a cold, crystalline fury that transformed fear into purpose. "You still don't understand," I said softly. "You're not the only one who's been making arrangements." I reached for my own phone, fingers dancing across the screen. Seconds later, Blackwood's device chirped with an incoming message. As he opened it, I watched his last defenses crumble. The message contained a single photo, Blackwood's private vault in Geneva, its contents meticulously documented by someone he had trusted implicitly. Someone who had spent decades earning that trust while feeding information to Eleanor Wright. "Grandmother's final gift," I explained, savoring the moment of his complete comprehension. "She didn't just teach me strategy, Thomas. She taught me the value of having loyal friends in unexpected places." The sound of car doors slamming outside echoed through the house. Blackwood's men looked to him for direction, but he stood frozen, decades of carefully constructed dominance shattering like glass. But as federal agents began flooding the house, as Mark reached for my hand in a gesture of newfound understanding, I saw something in Blackwood's eyes that sent ice through my veins. A flash of desperate calculation that told me this game wasn't over, that he had one last card to play. And suddenly I understood that while grandmother had taught me how to wage war, she had also taught me something far more important: how to recognize when victory might cost more than you're willing to pay. Revelation comes in waves, each understanding washing away another layer of illusion until you stand face to face with naked truth. In that moment, as federal agents swarmed through grandmother's house like avenging angels, I saw the final piece of her legacy unfold before me, not in the evidence we'd gathered, not in the trap we'd set, but in the desperate calculation burning in Thomas Blackwood's eyes. "The vault in Geneva," he said, his voice carrying across the chaos with devastating precision. "Did you really think Eleanor only kept evidence there?" His gaze locked with mine, a predator's last strike. "Ask your brother about the real legacy she left. Ask him about the night she died." The world tilted beneath my feet as Mark's hand went slack in mine. In his face, I saw confirmation of what my heart had already begun to understand, that some betrayals cut too deep for redemption, that sometimes the greatest deceptions were the mask of love. "Tell me," I whispered, though part of me was already assembling the puzzle, fitting together pieces I'd refused to see. "Tell me it wasn't you." "She was going to expose everything," Mark said, his voice breaking. "Not just Blackwood's ring, all of it. The family's involvement, Dad's connections, the decades of looking the other way. She said the truth mattered more than protecting us." The truth. Such a simple word for such a devastating weapon. In that moment, I felt the weight of grandmother's final lesson, that sometimes victory requires sacrificing not just what you have, but what you believe about who you are. "The heart medication," I said, each word falling like lead between us. "You switched it that night." I tried to talk to her. Tears streamed down Mark's face, but I saw the steel beneath them, the same determination that had driven him to sell her collection, to orchestrate this elaborate plan. She wouldn't listen. She was going to destroy everything, Susan. Not just Blackwood, not just the art world, our whole family. I couldn't let her do it. Federal agents were leading Blackwood away, but his smile lingered in the air like poison. He'd known his defeat was inevitable, but he'd ensured his fall would take others with him. The perfect revenge against the woman who'd spent decades building the case against him, turning her own grandchildren against each other in one final, devastating revelation. But as I looked at my brother, this man who had killed for family, who had orchestrated an elaborate revenge against Blackwood while carrying the weight of his own guilt, I felt something unexpected bloom in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding. "She knew," I said softly, the realization dawning like a cold sun. "She knew what you'd done. That's why she left us the evidence separately, why she made sure I would find her journal first. She was giving us a choice." Mark's eyes met mine, desperation warring with hope. A choice. Between truth and family. Between justice and loyalty. I reached into my pocket, withdrawing the USB drive. She wanted us to understand the price of both. The evidence on the drive would destroy Blackwood's empire, expose decades of fraud and corruption. But it would also reveal our family's complicity, turn my brother from grieving grandson to murderer in the eyes of the law. In that moment, standing in the house where grandmother had taught us both strategy and sacrifice, I made my choice. The drive snapped easily between my fingers, its fragments falling like tears to the polished floor. "Ms. Wright," an FBI agent approached, notebook in hand. "We'll need your statement about Mr. Blackwood's operation." "Of course," I said, feeling the weight of grandmother's legacy settle finally, completely around my shoulders. "I'll tell you everything I know about the art fraud. About how Thomas Blackwood betrayed my grandmother's trust and corrupted the industry she loved. But not everything. Some truths would remain buried, not to protect the guilty, but to honor the woman who had understood that sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave is the choice of how to use the power we inherit." Mark's hand found mine again, and this time I let him hold on. We had both killed something precious tonight, his act had been swift and desperate, mine calculated and cold. But as the storm outside began to fade, as dawn crept towards the horizon, I understood at last what grandmother had tried to teach us all along. Legacy isn't in the things we leave behind, but in the choices we pass on to those who follow. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing exactly which truths to preserve, and which to let fade into the darkness of history.